I am so delighted to be here with you today at Tyndale Theological Seminary. And it's an honor to be giving these Brotzman lectures. I did not know Professor Brotzman personally, but we will be doing some textual criticism today. It's always hard work before we come to our conclusions about the scriptures. It's a real privilege to be able to serve you in some small way today. So our topic, Isaiah, did Matthew cite or use Isaiah 7:14 correctly? Or another way to look at it is Isaiah 7:12-16. Is this a direct prediction of a distant future relative to Isaiah's time? So debates have raged for centuries over many details in Isaiah 7. Apparently, by the 21st century, whether conservative or liberal, we have arrived at a consensus concerning one issue. The Hebrew word alma in verse 14 means young woman and does not necessarily indicate a virgin, that is, a young woman who has not yet had physical relations with a man. So this, I don't know if this is helpful. Here's a little history of the King James Bible. So 1611, the first edition or printing. Then this is a brief summary. It doesn't go through all of the editions and all of the printings, but in 1769 it was re-edited by Benjamin Blaney. 1881 we had the English Revised Version. 1952 we had the Revised Standard Version, and since 1989 the New Revised Standard Version. And in the RSV, so that's 1952, for the first time they translated the word alma by young woman instead of virgin. And this is also what we see in the NRSV. The firm position of recent scholarship raises real questions. If the consensus is correct, then why did the Greek translator in the 2nd century BC employ a Greek word that clearly means virgin in Hellenistic Greek, parthenos? Was the author of Matthew's Gospel misled in thinking that this text predicted the virgin birth of Jesus of Nazareth? For a commentator such as Wildberger, at one end of the spectrum, a contradiction between the Old and New Testaments is no problem. He says, the traditional interpretation of the church, based upon Matthew 1:23, takes the Alma or Parthenos to be Mary and Emmanuel to be Jesus. In some quarters, it is still considered correct today, even if there are certain reservations and an awareness that Isaiah would not have been able to anticipate the specific way in which the predictions would be fulfilled, end quote. For an interpreter such as James M. Hamilton, Jr., one of my former students and colleagues at Southern Seminary, and a conservative at the other end of the spectrum from Wildberger, one must find a satisfactory way to hold to the unity of the Old and New Testaments. He correlates Emmanuel with Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Imagine that boy trying to write his name in kindergarten. And believes that the text of Matthew can be explained satisfactorily as a typological fulfillment. This consensus, however, has been challenged recently by a linguist, Christophe Ricot. And he authored a book in French, La Mère de l'Enfant Roi, Isaïe, Zept 14, and I was involved in translating this book now into English. So it's called The Mother of the Infant King. And I contributed an appendix to this book, so he graciously put my name along there with his. And I can assure you, even though I'm speaking on this for 2 hours, it's only a small part of what you can get out of this book. From a linguistic point of view, Rico concludes that the prophecy refers to a birth by a young virgin to occur in the distant future relative to the time of Isaiah. In a recent review of Rico, Hugh Williamson, formerly Regius Professor of Hebrew at the University of Oxford, states, and I quote, "The problems relating to the meaning of Alma in Isaiah 7:14, its rendering by Parthenos in the Septuagint, and its clear use with reference to Mary as a virgin in the New Testament have been discussed endlessly since antiquity, and it would seem that no stone has been left unturned in the course of the centuries. In current scholarship, something of a consensus has developed with regard at least to some of the relevant issues, so it is a bold undertaking on Rico's part to challenge several facets of this consensus." End quote. So he does not like the challenge to the consensus. While Williamson argues that apparently no stone has been left unturned, Rico has in fact looked under many rocks no one else has overturned. Rico argues that Alma can only mean young virgin, and that Isaiah 7:14 is a prediction of the distant future relative to the time of Isaiah. The purpose of my lecture is to assess criticisms by Williamson and extend the research of Rico by contributing further to some of the grammatical, lexical, and textual issues. The methodology here is no different than that used by Rico. The text is analyzed in terms of the cultural and historical setting, the linguistic data, literary devices and structure, the context of the meta-narrative. There are several grammatical, lexical, and textual arguments in the research of Rico that could be sharpened, and as a result yield a firmer interpretation, a fact that he himself has acknowledged. So we look at the contextual and historical setting. The brief conversation recorded between Ahaz and Isaiah is a pivotal point in the narrative plot structure of the Old Testament that causes the tree of the Davidic dynasty to be cut down. In the Old Testament, kings and kingdoms are portrayed as tall, stately trees. The Assyrians are pictured as lofty trees in Isaiah 10:33 and 34. And in Isaiah 11:1, we come to the first reference of the stump of Jesse. This text employs an identical metaphor to show that the kingdom of the house of David is a tree cut down. All that remains is a stump. You can also see Isaiah 6, verse 13. The exile and promised return from exile. We all know that Israel, disloyal and faithless, broke the Mosaic covenant, inaugurated at Sinai, and supplemented in Deuteronomy, and that exile was the final judgment for their covenant violation, the end of Deuteronomy 28. Christians, however, frequently fail to grasp properly two things about the exile and the return from exile. First, the exile was not a singular event that occurred at one particular moment in the history of Israel. It was a process of gradual loss. The most northern tribal territories were the first to be lost. Later on, the northern kingdom suffered significant destruction in the attack by Tiglath-Pileser III in 732 BC, but was not conquered and exiled until 722 BC. Then in 701, Sennacherib came and attacked the southern kingdom of Judah and boasted that he had conquered 46 cities in Judah and had Hezekiah in Jerusalem shut up like a bird in a cage. So we actually have the records by Sennacherib. The first captives were taken in 605 or 604. Then the city was conquered in 597 by the Babylonians, and Nebuchadnezzar II set up a puppet king named Zedekiah. This king was murdered 10 years later, so that Nebuchadnezzar came back in 586 and burned and razed the city to the ground. So this chart illustrates, at least partially, the process of exile. God was gracious in fulfilling his threats. Second, the return from exile occurs in two stages. This is clear from both statements in the text and also from the literary structure of Isaiah 40 to 55. I didn't put the literary structure on a slide, but it's in the book Kingdom Through Covenant. First, there is physical exile of the people of Judah to Babylon, and then they return from exile in Babylon in roughly 70 years. So you see that prophesied in Jeremiah 25. Secondly, there is spiritual exile caused by their idolatry and social injustice, so that the covenant relationship with God is completely broken. As the vision in Daniel 9 makes clear, the return from spiritual exile will take much longer, that is 77s, and not just 70 years. Daniel 9:24 is focused on dealing with rebellion and sin and restoring everlasting righteousness. Daniel must understand that a physical return from Babylon does not adequately deal with the need for circumcision of the heart and proper restoration of the covenant relationship. Zechariah, along with Isaiah and Ezekiel, shows that this return from exile and restoration entails the forgiveness of sins, the rebuilding of the temple, the renewal of the covenant, and the physical return of Yahweh in person to dwell in the midst of his people as king. So you can get the people out of Babylon, but how do you get Babylon out of the people? That takes a lot longer. Only when we understand this will we grasp that some of Isaiah's visions apply to the physical return and some apply to the spiritual return. Moreover, the events are not presented chronologically, so that events to be fulfilled in the distant future are set side by side with those to be fulfilled in the near future. And I show this in my book, How to Read and Understand the Biblical Prophets. There's a little outline of Isaiah 7. We have in verses 1 to 9 the threat to the Davidic house, the conspiracy against the house of David, the response of the prophet, and the conspiracy will fail. Then we have verses 10 to 25, the Emmanuel sign, the birth of Emmanuel in verses 10 to 16, and then he goes back to the present and deals with the invasion of the Egyptians and Assyrians, the famine in Judah, and the desolation in Judah. The book of Isaiah is divided into 7 sections that deals with the theme of the transformation of Zion. How do we get from a corrupt Zion in the old creation to a new, transformed, and restored Zion in the new creation? And he goes around this topic 7 times. So Isaiah was way ahead of Dolby surround sound. This is Dolby 7.2. The first section is chapter 1:1 to 2:4, and the second is from 2:5 to 4:6. Chapter 5 begins the third section, developing the topic of idolatry and social injustice, resulting first in judgment and later in restoration. The judgment will come in the form of exile by the Assyrians and then by the Babylonians. So we expound the text. The threat to the Davidic house. A brief outline of Assyrian history shows in external terms the threat to the Davidic house in Judah and Jerusalem. So you can see it's a quick history of Assyria, and we have notice on this history that in 744 BC we have what we call the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So the Assyrian power had been dormant for a long time, and now the Assyrian giant was awakening, and this corresponds basically with the end of King Uzziah's reign. So Israel prospered during the reign of King Uzziah, but that's because when the cat's away, the mice can play. So the death of King Uzziah in 740 BC corresponds roughly with the rise of the late Assyrian Empire in phase 2 and explains the time of trouble experienced by Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. It is the year 734 BC. The events are described and detailed in 2 Kings 15 and 16. In a period of resurgence, Assyria was growing in power and in international influence. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, who is conveniently called Pul in the Bible, Assyria began to advance, first to the west and then south to Palestine and Egypt. The country of Aram, known as Syria later on, with its capital in Damascus, put pressure on the northern kingdom of Israel to form an alliance against the advancing power of Assyria. The northern kingdom of Israel is called Ephraim in verse 2, 5, and 9, probably because of Jeroboam the first king was from the tribe of Ephraim, and also because Ephraim was one of the largest and leading tribes. By this time, the territory of the northern kingdom had been greatly reduced in size, so that it may not have been much larger than the territory of Ephraim. The capital of northern Israel was the city of Samaria, and the capital of Aram was Damascus. Syria and Ephraim wanted to expand their anti-Assyrian alliance to include Judah. There's the Assyrian Empire, covering most of the ancient Near East. They wanted Judah to join them in their anti-Assyrian alliance, but King Jotham, Ahaz's father, refused to join them. So they decided to team up against Judah, and they plotted to lay siege against Jerusalem, depose Ahaz, and install a puppet king, the nameless son of Tabeel, in his place. This action would have brought about a dramatic and inglorious end to the Davidic dynasty. Then what of the covenant God made with David in 2 Samuel 7 that guarantees an everlasting dynasty, kingdom, and throne? So the whole Davidic covenant and Davidic dynasty is at stake right here. Naturally, this prospect is a frightening one for King Ahaz and the people of Judah. Verse 2 provides a vivid picture. Their hearts are shaking just like the forest trees waving before a strong wind. Ahaz is probably torn between two fears. First, he is panic-stricken at the thought of being attacked by Syria and Israel. A much greater fear, however, is the prospect of being attacked by the king of Assyria, which is what will happen if he joins the coalition. When he is confronted by Isaiah in verse 3, he seems to have already decided to hold out against Syria and Israel and seek the help of the king of Assyria against Israel and Samaria by submitting to Assyria as a client king or vassal state. This is clear because he is out inspecting Jerusalem's water supply in preparation for a siege. The city of Jerusalem was in a difficult situation because their main and only source of water was a spring that was situated just outside the city gates. And when you have a besieging army, you can't pay a water boy to go out and get water. It was Ahaz's successor, Hezekiah, who would build the famous 500-meter-long tunnel, bringing the water supply underground right inside the city wall to the pool of Siloam. In verses 3 to 6, Isaiah commands Ahaz and his people not to fear the kings of the Syro-Ephraimite coalition, but rather to put their total trust in Yahweh. The paragraph closes with an announcement that the conspiracy arising from the Syro-Ephraimite coalition will fail utterly. Isaiah offers Ahaz a radical alternative: forswear all military and political alliances and put his trust totally in Yahweh. There is a play on words at the end of verse 9. If you do not believe, you will not endure. Both the verb to believe and the verb to endure are from the same root, aman. The NIV attempts to show this by using the word stand. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. Isaiah also invites Ahaz to ask for just about anything as a sign. The answer given by Ahaz appears pious, but is insincere and completely lacking in covenant loyalty to Yahweh. He declares that he will not put the Lord to the test. From the history of Israel, we know that there is a sin of testing God, exemplified at Massah during the Exodus, Exodus 17. Essentially, it is the sin of unbelief that says, I will not believe nor will I trust God unless he first proves himself trustworthy by some miraculous sign. God wanted to know if the people would trust him to provide water on the basis of their recent experience of his trustworthiness. The people tested God by suspending their trust in him until he did a miracle in providing water. This essentially treats God like a magician or stuntman who has to demonstrate his ability to do tricks before they will accept proof of his person and power. In this text, it may seem that Ahaz is acting very piously by refusing to put God to the test, but in reality, he is demonstrating that he is a willfully unbelieving man. As we have seen, he has already decided what he will do. He is going to hold out against a siege attack from Syria and Israel and become a vassal of the king of Assyria in order to get the alliance of the northern kingdom of Israel and Aram off his back. In view of Ahaz's refusal to trust the Lord, Isaiah announces in verses 17 to 25 that Judah will soon be overrun and devastated by that very Assyria which Ahaz has foolishly decided to turn to for help. So in verses 17 to 25 and also in chapter 8, Assyria is pictured as a river that will overrun and flood the country right up to the neck. Set in between the threat to the Davidic house in verses 1 to 9 and the announcement of desolation by attacking armies in 17 to 25 is the paragraph in verses 10 to 16, where Isaiah presents the Emmanuel sign. The Emmanuel sign. So we're now looking at verses 13 to 16. These verses are at the heart of the section. Verses 1 to 12 lead up to them, and verses 17 to 25, which follow, indicate the result of Ahaz's decision. From the New Testament, we know that this prophecy finds fulfillment ultimately in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ, Matthew 1, 21 to 23. But what is the meaning of the prophecy according to the book of Isaiah or in the time of Ahaz? How does the sign apply to them? When Matthew and other writers of the New Testament say that a particular prophecy in the Old Testament is fulfilled, they do not discuss how to interpret the text in the Old Testament. Some prophecies are what we might call direct prediction, and some involve typological prediction. That is, events or people in the Old Testament serve as a model or pattern for what will happen in a greater event or person at a later time, and so are said to foreshadow or predict the later event or person. Just a couple of examples. A couple of examples from the Gospel of Matthew will illustrate the approach of the Gospel writer, such as Matthew. In chapter 2, verses 3 to 6, Herod asked the Jewish leaders where the Messiah would be born. They responded by quoting the prophecy from Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. The prophecy in Micah is an example of a direct prediction. The prophet is simply describing the details of a future event which has no fulfillment in his own day and time. Another example is the prophecy from Hosea 11:1, which says, out of Egypt I called my son. I have to be careful here because Dr. Bass did his dissertation on this. This is applied to the fact that Joseph was warned about the threat of Herod in a dream and was instructed to take his family to Egypt until the danger was over. When he then brought his family back to and settled in Nazareth, this was considered a fulfillment of the statement in Hosea. The statement in Hosea, however, has to do with the original Exodus. The nation of Israel was called the Son of God. Exodus 4, Israel is my son, my firstborn son, let my son go that he may serve me. And in the great events of the Exodus, God brought his son Israel out of Egypt. How is this a prophecy of the Messiah? Well, in the Gospel of Matthew, the life of Jesus is patterned after the history of the nation. Or to put it the other way around, the history of the nation foreshadows or models the events that would later happen to the Messiah. The Exodus is a type, and so we have a kind of typological prediction. When an Old Testament prophecy is fulfilled, the authors in the New Testament never pause to clarify. They never pause to clarify whether it is a direct prediction or a typological prediction. Common interpretations of chapter 7, verse 14. It is impossible in this brief lecture, although it may be fairly long as far as you're concerned, to describe and evaluate all explanations given in the history of interpretation for Isaiah 7:14. I will list 5 common interpretations. 1, Emmanuel is Hezekiah. That is, a wife of Ahaz will bear a son. It's one interpretation. Number 2, Emmanuel is Maher Shalal Hashbaz. That is, a wife of Isaiah will bear a son. Number 3, Emmanuel is a son born to an unknown woman who was a contemporary of Isaiah. Number 4, Emmanuel is the Messiah born to a virgin in the distant future. And number 5, a birth contemporary with Isaiah is a model or pattern or type of the future birth of the Messiah. Each interpretation depends heavily on how certain exegetical issues are handled. By the way, in the recent issue of Jets, there was an incredibly excellent article on Isaiah 7:14 by Seth Postel. So you want to supplement what I'm saying with his excellent article. The first 3 options can be firmly rejected, and I won't spend time on that. You can look at the commentary by Gary Smith in the New American Commentary series, and he gives good reasons for rejecting these. I am going to deal with the material that has been given by Christophe Rico, and I am going to deal with the criticisms raised by Professor Williamson to see whether they are valid. All right, let us begin to look at some of the exegetical issues. We'll handle some of them in this hour and some of them in the second hour. The first one is, to whom is the prophet speaking in verses 10 to 16. And it is not always possible from a modern English translation to track the pronominal references throughout the brief segment of verses 10 through 16. So in older English, we were able to distinguish the second person singular and the second person plural. The second person singular, thou, thee. The second person plural, you, ye. I assume we can still do that in Dutch and German and French. But it's not possible in my English comes from Ontario, Canada, and I do not distinguish between the second person singular and the second person plural. Where I live, they use you'ns, yous, y'all, or all y'all. So I have to listen to my grandchildren. Let's go through the text in detail. Verse 11 says, "Ask for yourself a sign from Yahweh your God, make it deep to Sheol," the underworld, the grave, or make it high above, upwards. These three clauses contain imperative verbs which are all second person masculine singular in form, as well as two pronouns, also both second masculine singular. So clearly, these commands are issued directly and specifically to Ahaz. It is Ahaz who is to ask for a sign. Verse 12 contains the brief response of King Ahaz. And Ahaz said, "I will not ask, nor will I test Yahweh." These verbs are first person common singular in form, and Yahweh is referred to in the third person, since the medium between him and God is the prophet Isaiah. Verse 13 continues the conversation by the simple verb, "and he said." This is obviously Yahweh or Isaiah speaking and giving a response to the answer given by Ahaz. The quoted speech begins as follows: "Hear, O house of David, is it too trivial for you to weary humans, that you must also weary my God?" The two verbs, the command to hear and the verb you must weary, are second person plural in form. The one pronoun employed with the infinitive to weary is also second person plural. So Yahweh or Isaiah is no longer addressing Ahaz directly or specifically. He is addressing the entire dynasty of David. This message is addressed to the house of David, and you need to see that in the text. Past, present, and future. The whole house of David. The pronoun in verse 14 is also second masculine plural in form. The sign in verse 11 was offered specifically to Ahaz. Ahaz declined. In spite of Ahaz's response, Yahweh gave a sign. The sign he gave was for the entire family line of David and is therefore not at all tied to the time of Ahaz. So that's very important. This sign does not have to be fulfilled in Ahaz's time. It's addressed to the entire Davidic dynasty. Verses 15 to 16a speak in the third person masculine singular about the promised child. Then remarkably, verse 16b switches back to the second masculine singular in form. The translation of this sentence is problematic, and I will address that in the second lecture. But it is clearly, verse 16b is clearly addressed specifically to Ahaz. So at the beginning he's addressing Ahaz, and at the end he's addressing Ahaz, and in the middle he's addressing the whole Davidic dynasty. The analysis of the pronoun resolves one important issue. The sign given in verses 14 and 15 is not necessarily for Isaiah's contemporaries or time. It is a sign that spans the entire history of the remaining Davidic family tree, an issue that is to be clarified in the prophecy in chapter 11, verse 1. The verbs in verse 14. So now we're going to deal with the verbs. Difficulties arise in dealing with the verbs in verse 14. The first clause is clear. Therefore, the Lord will give he to you a sign. So that's a very literal translation of the Hebrew. The verb is third masculine singular, and the subject is Yahweh, or the Lord. Actually, I think there's a distinction there, isn't there? Just check that. Yes, it's the Lord. It's not Yahweh, it's the Lord. This is not always clear in our English translations. The clause employs something that we call left dislocation as a discourse grammar marker. Let me explain. If I have a clause, if I have a sentence, I like Charlie, I can say Charlie, comma, I like him. So I can take the object, I can put it out front, and I can replace it with a pronoun. By putting Charlie in front, or in what we call extraposition, emphasis or focus is placed on the fronted item. So we have fronting here. The second half of verse 14 is problematic. The first 5 words form a verbless clause. Look, a virgin will conceive and bear a son. The verbs conceive and bear are in fact participles. The helping verb to be, required by English, has to be supplied from the context. One could translate the clause with present progressive tenses in English. A virgin is conceiving and bearing a son. Or one could construe the participles as describing a future, as is normal syntax in Hebrew. A virgin will conceive and bear a son. Both options are grammatically possible. W.H. Houston criticizes Rico for claiming that the participle requires that we understand that the girl is conceiving while she is a virgin, since the action must be simultaneous. Yet a biblical Hebrew reference grammar, 2nd edition, states that the prototypical semantic value of the participle in classical biblical Hebrew is that of continuous action that takes place simultaneously with the reference time of an event. Here, since the following finite verb is future, a future tense is probable. So notice that the following verb is very clearly future in the Hebrew text. And it is a young virgin who conceives. The next verb is wukara, wukarath. First, this is a wow consecutive perfect and must be translated as a future finite tense. Thus, construing the preceding participles as future is also highly probable. Second, the verb could be one of 2 things. It could be second feminine singular, or it could be third feminine singular. So it could be you shall call, addressing the virgin, or it could be she will call, where the subject is the virgin. A third feminine singular is more likely, as we shall see. Now we are going to do some textual criticism, because this is our first problem. The textual criticism, we will look at the options that we have here in the history of the transmission of the text, and see which option is the best, which option can claim to be the best possibility for the original text of Isaiah. Unfortunately, This problem is not treated by Barthélemy in Critique textuelle de l'Ancien Testament, which is five volumes dealing with textual criticism. I don't know if you students know this, but so Eugene Nida, who was the leader of the United Bible Society, he got together in the 1970s. He got together the best Old Testament textual scholars in the world. And they selected about 3,000 or 5,000 problems in the Old Testament, and they spent 10 years analyzing them. And the results were published, first of all, in the preliminary report on the Old Testament Text Project, which is in French and English. And then they produced the final report, which is available only in French. And those books were very expensive. The first one cost $150, the second one cost $250, the third one cost $350, the fourth one cost $450, and the fifth one was $450, and you can download them for free as PDFs. So for you, there is no excuse. And if you don't know French, just use Google Translator. But the Dutch are very good. They know all the languages, French, German, everything. It's not treated by Barthélemy nor by Jan de Waard in his handbook on Isaiah, which is excellent. So I'm going to go through all of the evidence. So the first thing is I give what I call the external evidence. I list all of the sources. So first of all, we have the Masoretic text, and the best witnesses for this are the Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex. The Aleppo Codex is from 930 AD, and the Leningrad Codex is from 1008. The Aleppo Codex is not complete, but it was considered by Maimonides, the greatest scholar of the Middle Ages, and by modern scholars to be the best manuscript of the Hebrew Bible. And you can see that it has Wukarath. We also have, I also looked at the Cairo Codex of the Prophets, which was done in 896, and it was written by Moshe ben Asher, who is the father of Aharon ben Asher, who did the Aleppo Codex. And the reason I check this is it has a marginal note, which is called, you can see the abbreviation MP, stands for Masora Parwa. This is a marginal note, and the marginal note tells us that this form only occurs 4 times in the Hebrew Bible: Genesis 16, Deuteronomy 31, Isaiah 7, and Isaiah 60. So the Masoretic text has the form Wukarath. As I said, this form can be analyzed as a wow consecutive perfect, second feminine singular from kara, or it could be an archaic conjugation form according to the pattern of third hay verbs, wow consecutive perfect, third feminine singular. So you can see the grammar by Bergstresser. The marginal note in the Cairo Codex alerts the reader to the fact that this form occurs 4 times in the Hebrew Bible. A 5th occurrence is a perfect without wow in Jeremiah 43:23. So you can see these are the 4 occurrences. Note that aside from Isaiah 7:14, the only forms that are third feminine singular are from kara to happen. The forms from kara to call are clearly second feminine singular. So we have in Hebrew homonyms, words that are spelled the same but are not etymologically related. And so we have kara to call and kara to happen. These are the medieval witnesses according to Kennicott, de Rossi, and Ginsburg. The consonantal form, wow, kof, resh, aleph, tau, could be vocalized as wukaratha, and second masculine singular, you will call. De Rossi and Ginsburg argue for this form although only 4 medieval manuscripts have this vocalization. What this shows us is that the feminine singular form was problematic, at least to some scribes. The Babylonian tradition is not extant, but I checked it. I checked everything. So this is what I call going to the basement, okay? We are going to go through this in detail. The Dead Sea Scroll. So here we have, there are a number of manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls that have Isaiah. Only one of them actually has chapter 7, verse 14, and that's the great Isaiah scroll, which you can go to Israel, you can go to Jerusalem, and it's there in the shrine of the book, and you can see it, and you can also access this online. So you students are living in today with an embarrassment of riches that are readily available to you, and as Paul would say, are therefore without excuse. So you can see that this manuscript has wukara. The form waw kof resh aleph could be a waw consecutive perfect pual, third masculine singular, or it could be kal, third masculine singular. So we don't have the vowels. We don't know whether they vocalized it as a kal active or a pual passive. The kal active form would be construed as having an indefinite subject, one will call, and equivalent to a passive construction. So it doesn't matter whether we take it as kal active or pual passive, the form is passive functionally and syntactically. His name will be called. Or we could translate they, an indefinite they will call his name. Rico chooses this as the best reading, and we will see why momentarily. So there's the options from there's the Dead Sea Scroll. This is the Septuagint, and we have the scholarly editions produced in Göttingen, Germany. And this project began in 1908 and is still going. And I did Ecclesiastes in this project. So I traveled to Göttingen every year to work on that. Göttingen ist meine zweite Heimat. And this year I am 72 years of age, which means I am an authority on the Septuagint. Now, here's the apparatus. Don't worry, I will help you make sense out of all this gobbledygook. There is a problem in the apparatus of Ziegler. He assumes that the word kalesitai is an etacistic spelling of kalesite, and his apparatus does not tell us which manuscripts attest which of these variants. So let me explain this. The vowel epsilon, and the diphthong ai were pronounced exactly the same by the scribes. So it's easy to confuse these two spellings. The system of 16 vowels in classical Greek had collapsed into 6 vowels by the time the Septuagint was being copied and the New Testament was being written. And that's why you have many words that can be easily interchanged. And this is what I'm calling eticism. I was able to consult the original collations in Göttingen, and this is what I discovered. So these are the manuscripts that have the second person plural, kalesita, you will call, and then there are 4 manuscripts that have kalesitai, which is the future passive, he will be called. So this is how I have corrected the apparatus of the Göttingen Septuagint, and don't worry, I will give you a simplified list in a moment, okay? And before we look at this gobbledygook, before analysis of the textual tradition of the Septuagint, we can provide the readings of the Jewish revisers and the citations in the New Testament, which may have influenced the scribes of the Septuagint. So, first of all, the Jewish revisers, we have Theodotion. Behold, the young woman will be pregnant and will bear a son. Aquila, behold, the young woman will conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel. And then Symmachus, 180 AD, behold, the young woman will conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name Emmanuel. Even though we don't have Theodotion, we don't have the whole text of Theodotion, both Eusebius and Jerome affirm that all three have you will call, which would include Theodotion. So the Jewish revisers of the Septuagint have the second person plural, or singular, sorry. The apparatus of the Septuagint gives references to the New Testament for citations that might have influenced scribes of the Septuagint. So here you can see that the apparatus mentions Matthew 1:21, Luke 1:31, and Matthew 1:23. So let's look at those. Matthew 1:21, he will bear a son and you will call his name Jesus. Here's the angel tells Joseph that Mary will bear a son and commands Joseph to name him Jesus. This is not a citation of Isaiah 7:14, and the second person singular conforms to the context in Matthew. Luke 1:31, you will conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name Jesus. The context is the angel telling Mary she will become pregnant and commands her to name the child Jesus. So naturally the verb is second singular. This is also not a quotation of Isaiah. Then we have Matthew 1:23. Behold, the virgin will become pregnant and bear a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel. This is a genuine citation of Isaiah 7:14 following the Septuagint. It differs from the addition of Ziegler in that the verb is third person plural. But notice the third person plural verb matches functionally or syntactically what we have in the Dead Sea Scroll. So this could be an accurate translation of the text that we have in the Dead Sea Scroll. Let us now tackle the problem in the transmission of the Septuagint. First note, so there's the corrected apparatus, and there I have simplified it for you. You can see all of the different readings and the manuscripts which support each reading. First, notice that Sinaiticus and two manuscripts from the Lucianic group have kalasai, third person singular. While this corresponds formally to the reading of the Dead Sea Scroll, and it is possible that a Greek scribe corrected towards the Hebrew on the basis of Kaiget translation, it is not the most plausible explanation. It is much more likely that it to be a simple scribal error or an interpretation by a Greek scribe. As we have seen already, a third person singular fits the context much better than the second person singular. Second, the reading kalasseis is almost certainly a correction of the original text due to hexaplerich influence from Theodotion, Aquila, and Symmachus, and possibly also the New Testament. Manuscripts supporting it belong to the hexaplerich recension. So I've bolded, notice BV 88, 109, 736, and the Syro-Hexapla. These are manuscripts influenced by Origen's Hexapla. And the Alexandrian group is influenced by it. Already in 1939, Ziegler noted that Vaticanus corrected towards the Hebrew in places that were not due to Origen. We now know that Vaticanus is recensional, probably belonging to the Hezekian recension, and made corrections towards the Hebrew based on what we call Kaiget texts. I have shown this, and Anneli Amaleus has shown it. Ziegler did not know about the Kaiga revisions or the Greek Minor Prophet Scroll from Nachal Hever. Notice that Theodotion, Aquila, and Symmachus all construed their parent text Wukarath as second-person singular. This proves that a third-person feminine form was archaic and not part of their knowledge of Hebrew. They were true to the text they had, even though it did not make the best sense in context. No doubt Ziegler chose Colossae because it matched the Masoretic text. Nonetheless, a better choice might be the future passive third-person singular Colessetai, which matches the Dead Sea Scroll. Indeed, Colessetai is a good idiomatic rendering of a parent text such as the Dead Sea Scroll. The second-person plural is due to eticism. As we shall see shortly, the reading of the Old Latin confirms that Colessetai is original Septuagint. The Old Latin was a translation directly from the Septuagint. In 1939, Ziegler did not have access to a critical edition of the Old Latin. The third-person plural also matches the Dead Sea Scroll, but it is likely due to influence from the New Testament. There is good reason, then, to question the reading proposed as original text by Ziegler. No doubt he chose it because it matches the Masoretic text. Nonetheless, a better choice might be the future passive third singular Colessetai, which matches the Dead Sea Scroll. The second-person plural is due to eticism. The second-person singular, assumed by original, is supported by hexapleric witnesses coming from Aquila and Symmachus. It is a secondary variant and not original in my view. Now let's have a quick look at the Old Latin, the Vulgate, the Syriac, and the Aramaic Targum. We'll do that quickly. There's the Old Latin. A critical edition of the Old Latin was published in 1997. According to the editor, the X text is the earliest possible reconstruction, and it supports Colessetai. The K text is North African, and it supports Colessete, the eticistic variant. The E text is European and represents corruption from the Vulgate. So according to the editor of the critical edition of the Old Latin, the original Septuagint should be Colessetai. This is important evidence not recognized by Ziegler. The Vulgate by Jerome. The editors of both the San Girolamo and Weber editions of the Vulgate chose the second-person plural form as original. But as Kedar Kopstein argues, this is not likely. Early important manuscripts reading Vocabitur support the Septuagint Colessetai, so the third-person passive singular. The form vocabitis is second-person plural and doubtless a variant derived from the transmission of the Old Latin. The form vocabis is second-person singular and comes from Jerome's commentary on Isaiah. Jerome gives karathi as a transliteration of the Hebrew, which is an archaic second-person singular text, the same as Aquila and Symmachus. Nonetheless, Jerome is also aware of the third-person singular passive reading that we have in the Dead Sea Scroll. So vocabitur is probably the best candidate for the original text of the Vulgate in spite of the editors. This is the Syriac. You probably don't read Syriac, but I put it in Aramaic square script for you at the bottom. The Syriac has, because of this, the Lord God will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin is pregnant and bearing a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel. So the Syriac translation is early, possibly 2nd century AD, and has a future passive third-person singular, which supports the great Isaiah scroll and what I am proposing as original Septuagint. The Aramaic Targum. Therefore the Lord himself will give you the sign. Behold, the young woman is pregnant and shall bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. So it has the form in the Targum could be second masculine singular or third feminine singular. The latter is more likely according to the context. So now we have a quick discussion of the internal evidence, and we will end this part of the lecture. Beginning with the witness of the Masoretic text, as Williamson helpfully notes, Wukarath looks like a second-person feminine singular form exactly as we have in Genesis 16:11. He says it is difficult to suppose, however, that Isaiah suddenly turns to the prospective mother, whose presence at the scene is otherwise unnoticed, and would involve a sudden switch from her being referred to in the third person immediately in the same saying. So we must interpret the form as third person feminine. Williamson goes on to argue that the Masoretic text is original. He states, "For me, the coincidence in the form of the word here with that in Genesis 16:11, which is, as we have seen, is the same as the present text with respect to the whole saying from Hine on, is too striking to be coincidental," end quote. Nonetheless, the verb in Genesis 16 is second person, and the context here is third person. So Williamson must explain why the author allowed an archaic form here that is not attested elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. Moreover, no explanation is given as to what intertextual connection might exist between the woman of Isaiah 7 and Hagar. Let us consider the reading of the Dead Sea Scroll. This may possibly be original or it may be secondary. Donald Perry argues that it is secondary because the archaic third feminine singular was not understood. He also suggests that the scribe assimilated the reading to Isaiah 9:5. Notice, however, that the sequence, conceive, bear a son, and call his name, is not only found in Genesis 16, but also in Isaiah 8. The sequence, a child is born to us, a son is given, and one called his name in 9:5 is not as similar. The text in 8:3 is closer. She conceived and bore a son, and Yahweh said to me, call his name. What the parallel passages in Genesis and Isaiah show is a similar sequence, possibly formulaic, where the forms of the verbs in each case are constrained by the demands of the context. It could well be that the form in the Dead Sea Scroll is original and that the form in the Masoretic text was assimilated to Genesis 16. This would be an easy mistake to make since the previous verb ends in tau and a scribe could add a tau to the next verb. There is not much possibility of assimilation of Isaiah 7 to either 8:3 or 9:5 in my opinion. Williamson admits the possibility of the Dead Sea Scroll being original as he concludes his discussion. He says, while I have to acknowledge the alternative possibility that the reading Wukara was original and that it was unconsciously assimilated to the reading in Genesis 16 by accident, I prefer to retain the Masoretic text as the harder reading. It might be easier to choose Kalesitai as original Septuagint based on a manuscript like the Dead Sea Scroll. Scribes then corrected this to Kaleseis on the basis of Kaiga texts or the Hexapla. Kalesita is an eticism, and the reading in Matthew may possibly represent a translation from a text such as the Dead Sea Scroll. So here's the summary. We have the Septuagint supported by the Old Latin, the Dead Sea Scroll, the Syriac, and the Vulgate against the later Masoretic text, the three Jewish revisers, Jerome and the Targum. If the Dead Sea Scroll is original, one can imagine a copyist conforming the verb to the previous third feminine singular to smooth things out. It involves the addition of T. If the Masoretic text is original, the reading of the Dead Sea Scroll might be seen as an easier reading, but not obviously so. So this shows you that adding a T in the Paleo-Hebrew script would be the same, would be as easy to do as in the Aramaic square script. Williamson, okay, I'm ready to conclude. Williamson, in his description of the exegesis of Rico, notes that Rico's exegesis, quote, includes the emendation of wukarat to wukara construed as a passive, end quote. The wording of Williamson's statement is prejudicial. According to him, Rico is emending the Masoretic text based on the Qumran scroll. My analysis shows that the reading of the Qumran scroll is likely supported by the Septuagint and the Old Latin, the Syriac Peshitta, while the later reading of Aquila, Symmachus, Jerome, and the Masoretic text may well be secondary. This conclusion does not affect whether the prophecy applies to the distant or near future, but it does show that Rico's analysis is more solid than Williamson makes it seem. So what can we say about all of this massive effort? Well, it's if the Dead Sea Scroll has the original text, then the translation that we have in Matthew would be following the original text. So what I'm saying is the translation of Matthew may be the original text, and a better text than what we have in Siegler.